sounds very, very interesting. And when you did, for example, interviews, what kind of interview you used? Was it semi-structured? How did you do it? And could you give an example of questions? How do you map out these bioecological factors?
I worked mostly with focus groups interviews, but also with individual interviews and paired interviews as well. But mostly focus group interviews with. Then I'll have like 3 to 6 or even 7 children in a group. It's a little bit dependent on the age of the children. It's easier to interview many children simultaneously when they're a little bit older. So when I interview like 8-year-olds, I think it's better to have fewer children in each group. So then maybe it's ideal to have 4 children in each group. So I mainly conducted focus groups interviews, and they are good in the way that they make the children feel comfortable. So they speak a lot because they are many, and you are just 1 or 2 researchers. So the children feel very, very comfortable, and they feel confident in speaking. So that's good with focus groups compared to individual interviews. But I think the downside is that there's always children that will hide during focus groups. You don't. It's very hard to get the opinions or getting some of the children to speak. And I think it's a methodological problem, because it's most often, if you're interviewing children about physical activity and sports, it's most often children that enjoy sports and like sports and like physical activity that will speak the most. So it's important to like think of how you put together the groups, or how to design or think about the sample when you're doing focus groups interviews. So that's mainly how I done. And the questions I've asked is basically to get the children to talk a lot about physical activity and sports in various settings. So I think it's not that much up to exactly what questions you ask as a interviewer or a moderator in that situation. It's more about just getting them to speak, because most often I interview quite small children. As I said, they can be 8, 9, 10 years old, and they are often quite short in their answers. So they are just quite often, they want to say stuff that they think you as a researcher want to know. So they just telling you something, and then or they just answer yes or no, or I like it, or it's fun. So the hard thing is to get them to tell a bit more, or go deeper into their experiences, or how they perceive different activities, or how they feel during various activities. And small children doesn't really reflect upon these issues that much either. So it's very important to try to set up like a social climate in the focus group so they can start thinking and reflect in the situation. So I think that's when these groups are functioning best. It's when children start talking to each other and they are reflecting in the moment, and sometimes they realize new things, or coming up with new thoughts that they didn't think of earlier.
And when they start talking, do you think they usually talk the things that are interesting for the researchers, or do you need to nudge them and direct them to the right ways, or do they usually talk about things that are important, emotional, and you are interested in those things? So how do you feel it usually goes?
I would say it's quite hard to, or at least it feel like it's hard to get real honest and deep statements from children that you most often you meet the children once. You have never met them before. They haven't met you. You're total strangers to each other, and you sit down with them for like 45 minutes, and they have the energy to speak like for 35 minutes maybe. Then they have to go up and do something else, and want to go out for a break or something. So it's really hard to get them to speak or to dig deeper into issues. So I think it's quite often that they say something that they think I, as a reader, researcher want to know, or what I expect them to say. So in new projects now, or in studies now, I try to have at least 2 interviews with each child. Then it's maybe easier. It is possible in focus group interviews also, but in when doing individual interviews with children, I think it's much better to meet them at least twice and have at least 2 interviews with them, so that you can, at least to a certain degree, learn to know each other and build some trust between the researcher and the child, so they can feel a little bit more confident in exploring and reflecting on also quite hard or more uncomfortable aspects of physical activity, because that's a really important thing to investigate here. I'm not that interested in all the children. That most children think sports are really fun, and they think it's really fun to move around and do activities. But I mean, the problem and what we are trying to investigate is why do some children not enjoying to be physical activity? What is the problem, and how can we find new ways and new activities so these children feel more safe and can feel more enjoyment in different physical activities.
And earlier you said that in focus group usually the inactive ones are hiding a bit and you don't get their comments. Maybe do you have any ways to reducing this bias in your study, or do you just state that probably this is biased sample, or what can you do with it?
What I did was basically to conduct a new study and only including children. In that study, I only included physically inactive children. So I conducted a new focus group study only containing children that they were asked by their teacher, or they recruited by their class teacher. They were identified by the teacher and their PE teacher as inactive. So the requirements was that they were often absent from physical education. They often were quite passive on school breaks and not participating in any sports in their spare time. So they were identified by their teachers, and then we put together 5 focus groups with just these children. So they sat down together, and of course that's another study. It's a study about just physically inactive children, but then you can start explore more in detail, like issues of avoidance of physical activity and exclusion and negative experiences, and of course they can identify with each other, and they feel more safe in exploring these issues.
And when you're doing the focus group, you have the bioecological model in the back of your head. Can you direct the discussion to that, or do you basically first just collect children talking of something and then you try to apply the model on the data, on the transcripts that you have, or how does it work in practice?
The interview schedule is designed to cover the aspect of the model that I'm interested in, and as I mentioned earlier, it's I think the hard thing is to decide what kind of or how to delimit the model to these factors that we're trying to explore in the particular study. But then basically we covered these topics, not necessarily in any specific order, but it's our ambition to have covered all the topics when the focus group is over. And sometimes it is hard because you have quite a limited time with, at least with the smaller children, the younger children. It's not possible, and it's not ethical to like keep them for very long interviews. So you have to cover all the topics quite fast, but also you also have to be ready that the children they can quite often speak about completely other things as well. They can tell you stories, or they love to just tell you rules about the games, or how their games are conducted, or how you play a certain game or something. So you have to be ready for listening to stuff like that, and that can also be interesting, of course. But the schedule is designed from the model, but I'm also I'm also ready to take a few steps on at the side.
No, that's very interesting. It sounds like fun, interesting, and challenging. When I have ended up doing podcast and having a company and not doing research because I thought that I don't want to spend all days with Excel and SPSS, but that sounds fun. Maybe I should have been thinking of doing focus groups with 8-year-old. That sounds fun. Do you feel it fun, or how is the process of data collection?
Well, I love that part of the research process is the best, I think. Um, of course, it can be frustrating if you're trying to force things, but I mean that I try to, or I enjoy that situations where you sit with a lot of kids and I mean they give their time for nothing really, and they're just happy to tell something about themselves and how they relate to physical activity, and that's what I'm interested in. So I think it's most often it's just really good situations and which I enjoy. But yeah, of course it can, as I said, it can be frustrating and perhaps more in the beginning in the when I in my dissertation project you of course you're in a time limit and you have to you have the you have to mm, publish papers and stuff like that, of course, and you have that in back of your head. So but now when I'm doing this kind of research and interview, now I'm interviewing children individually in the study, children that are physically inactive as well, and I think it's just so interesting to hear about hearing their stories and how their daily lives goes on and how they try to be physically active, and they telling about the struggle it really to be physically active. It's not that they don't care about physical activity, even though they may be completely inactive. It's always something that is they think about, and it's something that it's really important to them, but they don't have the tools or the conditions to be physically inactive in their everyday lives. So yeah, it's really interesting, I think.
Yeah, really interesting.